Homelessness that was adopted in April. So I'm going to ask the panelists to come down in a second, but I also want to point out that there's information on the table when you came in about the coalition and about Child and Family Services, who is on this panel tonight, and also some information about an upcoming fundraising event on March 28th, Superfest, with a fun fest in the afternoon and soup fest in the evening. So we hope to see many of you there if you can come. There's some people in the audience today who are not on the panel, and I just want to point them out because they're probably going to have a lot to add to this discussion. One is Reverend John Hopkins, right there. He's with Concordia Lutheran Church and also a board member on the Family Promise Initiative, which is a family homelessness shelter model that they're getting started in the Concord area. We have some members of the steering committee for the Concord's plan to end homelessness here. Ron White is in the back there with the Merrimack County Department of Corrections, and on the steering committee that is overseeing Concord's plan to end homelessness. And Ruth Perincevich was here earlier. She's also on the steering committee, but she had to leave early. And there's a couple of people here from the Bureau of Homeless and Housing Services. Mike Puleo and is Julie Lane here? There you are. So anything you guys want to add to the conversation would be great. And so now Peter Evers is going to moderate the conversation, and if all the panelists want to come down, then I'll let them all introduce themselves. So thank you all for coming out.
Thank you, So thank you everybody for coming out tonight. And I think our format tonight is that we're going to talk a little bit about the film, and then I'm going to ask panel members to introduce themselves and give their reflections from their own professional experience.
I've been sitting way too long anyway.
Okay. Reaction to the film. And maybe I'll start by doing that. My name is Peter Evers. I have the privilege of working for Riverbend Community Mental Health Centre, which has been around. We celebrated our 50th anniversary last year. And, you know, as I think about this, I think about the role that mental illness plays in homelessness. And my first reactions to the movie were a reflection on, I think, where I've come from professionally. I have worked in Boston for the last 23 years, mostly with kids, mostly in child abuse, mental illness and addiction services. And those things, it's important to sort of speak to those things all together. And I think my message will sort of come through in a minute around this. My immediate reaction to this was two things. There was a statement that came up on the screen at the end that said 1.6 million young people are homeless in America. Well, that's a big number. And we make a lot of assumptions in our society about people that are homeless. Our assumptions are that, you know, well, they have every opportunity to do well, so, you know, there must be something wrong with those people. And what I felt was amazing about this movie was you began to drill down into individual stories of people, and what you come away with is the exact opposite of that. Here are young people who have really had a bad deal. You know, there's trauma in their lives. There's probably mental illness. There is abandonment. There is this notion of people not being able to connect and attach in a way that most people can. And yet, there's a resilience in those people that has allowed them to keep hope. And that hope they attach to, and this is, I think, important, adults in their lives who can give them some sort of connection and hope to keep going, despite of the fact that there are so many obstacles that come up. Rocky, who you saw, had very good taste, like the Beatles, which is important. But here is a young man who sees an opportunity for himself and an important adult who he attaches to, and it was so moving to see that. And there probably wasn't a dry hour in the house when the Northeastern University of Illinois letter came saying that he had got in, because it's the triumph of doing that. You know, I personally have 3 children who got into school with every privilege they could possibly have. And it was tough, it was difficult for them. Can you imagine how difficult it is for somebody who has all of that in front of them? So my takeaway from the movie was this is hope, this is resiliency, this is struggle though. And there are so many struggles that come up with young people around homelessness that many of them can't get over those barriers, and it's very understandable. And so, personally, I think it really put a face to homelessness with emerging adults that we really need to see and we need to talk about in our society. So, maybe can we start with you?
Sure. Somehow she didn't believe me when I said I was tired of sitting. I just, am I good? Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. My name's Marty Brennan. I'm a speech language pathologist by my training, and I worked in Rochester schools since 1990. But the last 10 years of my work there was as an administrator administering the Homeless Education Grant and the Title I grant for the district. Until I retired in 2012. Oh, good grief. Now I still do some work with Dr. Thistle Elliott, who's the head of the Homeless Education Program at the Department of Education. And I'm a member of the New Hampshire Teen Task Force, which goes back to the Governor Lynch days, asking us to study and report to him about homeless teens and particularly homeless youth in New Hampshire. That committee long expired when Governor Lynch went on his way, but we are still meeting the third Thursday of every month because we know there's still a lot of work left to do. I think it's interesting that you noted someone took Rocky in, and gee, that was a teacher. And how many of these kids that were highlighted in this film talked about education and the need to complete their education. And coming from the education position, we believe that is the way out of the homelessness and poverty. And so we do help our kids as much as we can to stay in school, to keep a consistency in the school that they're attending, because when you change schools, you lose ground. So we do have a McKinney-Vento law that helps us to maintain our school of origin for our kids so that they have the best opportunity and chance to be successful. I guess I would, I'm going to pass this down, but I do know one of the biggest things when I talk to service providers in communities is they say to me, I can't do my work with kids who are under 18. I'm going to leave you on that note to think about, because that's one of the biggest issues. Take it away, Jocelyne.
Hi, my name is Jocelyne Pinsonneault, and I'm the District Homeless Liaison in Manchester, as well as Parent Involvement Coordinator, where I've been doing this work since 2007. And as you saw in the movie, there's a lot of, or the documentary, there's a lot of kids that have barriers, and these were some of the lucky ones. I work with kids every day that don't have a place to stay, a consistent place to stay on a daily basis. And so we do the best we can. A lot of them come back to school after dropping out because they realize they can't do anything without that high school degree. So part of my job is to remove those barriers for them and get them to be in the best program that they can be. Sometimes it's not the traditional classroom, but it could be the high set, which was former GED, or alternative school such as VLAD, or whatever works for them, but the barriers have to be removed, and so that they can get a good education and go out and make something of themselves and prove to themselves that they can contribute.
Hi, my name is Erin Kelly. I'm the Program Director for Child and Family Services Runaway and Homeless Youth Programs. And when I look at this movie, it really makes me grateful for the work that I get to do every day, because I really have the honor to meet youth just like this and learn their stories and start to understand where their skills and their strengths and their assets come from, and help them to recognize those things in themselves so that they can find their own success story. And at Child and Family Services, we really try to develop a continuum of care for runaway and homeless youth. But this is a service that cannot be done in a vacuum. We could never, as an organization, solve the problem of youth homelessness on our own. we definitely need every single organization, school district, community member to come to the table and take this on as a focus of something that they would want to put their time and their effort into, because it really does take a village, especially when a child doesn't have a family. And I would like to just point out the fact that we actually have a transitional living program in Concord. Here, it's about 2 minutes from here, and we currently have 6 young people that are just like the youth that you just watched in this movie, who are residing in our transitional living program, and they've all come from, you know, different backgrounds, time on the streets, living in their cars, couch surfing, moving around from place to place, and are really trying to put one foot in front of the other every day to try to develop their own success story and make their own life for themselves. And that's just one piece of the program that we offer throughout the state. So thank you for having me today. Thank you for coming.
Hi, my name is Lorrie Scandalis, and I am the program coordinator at Friends Emergency Housing, which is currently the only family shelter in the county. We have 8 families. We are always full. We try to give our families tools to, we work with Riverbend, we work with a lot of case management, we work with a lot of housing programs. We get them back on track with budgeting, job seeking, benefits, things like that. I also want to share that 7 years ago, I had a mortgage, 2 vehicles, and 2 dogs. And 2 years later, I was homeless because of a corporate layoff. We ended up losing our business, our house, and I actually was a client of a Friends Emergency Housing. Lived there with 3 of my children who were still minors at the time. I have 5. I was there for 11 months, and they were amazing. And going in, I was terrified. I'd never been in that situation. But finding out all of the community resources and how all of these agencies work together was just amazing. And after 11 months, I got back on my feet, waited a while, went back to volunteer, and now I've been there I'm in my 4th year. Best job I ever had, and it's amazing. This movie, I think, was really hard. I think it's a testament to the fact that kids, adults, everybody just needs one person to believe in them, and then they start believing in themselves. And I think the kids in this movie were amazing, and I think that everybody should have that kind of support, emotionally, physically, just so that they can believe in themselves.
Hello, my name is Douglas Osterhoudtt. I wasn't really supposed to be here tonight, but Dr. Elliott couldn't make it, so she asked me to come as a stand-in because I work under her at the Department of Education in the Office of Homeless and Migrant Education. And just my background is I'm actually an attorney, and I was a corporate attorney and wanted to change the scene. And it took me 30 years to realize what Anthony realized in his teenage years, that to be a king, you have to be a servant. So I signed up for AmeriCorps, interviewed with a bunch of places, really loved the people. I work with Marty and Jocelyne a lot, a little bit with Erin. Really great group of people. One of the big things I think people don't realize, and I know I certainly didn't realize, and I'm much newer on this scene than anyone else on this panel, is that there are over 3,000 homeless students in this state. And this is my 7th year. I'm originally from New York. This is my 7th year in this state. I had no idea. I can't pick them out on the street. I don't know who they are, how to help them. And this has just been such an eye-opening experience. And again, going back to the education, it's not just of the students, but it's ourselves too. If a homeless student came up to you and said, "Help me," would you know how to do it? A lot of us wouldn't. I know I didn't know how. And I'm learning a lot. I have a lot more to learn. But I'm just very grateful that I've been able to be a part of this whole thing. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, panel. You know, as we were talking, it reminded me of the importance of the social compact that we have as a community. That the solution for any of these issues, these social issues, especially homelessness, doesn't lie in one realm, but it lies in the collective strength of many, many people sort of igniting a message, which is, we are a society that should not tolerate some of the injustice that is surrounded by with homelessness. And it came over to me very clearly then that that everybody has a stake in this and everybody's working together, but never underestimate the importance of an interaction with somebody in need. And I think that clearly came out in the movie. I'd like to sort of throw this out to the audience and impressions, thoughts, any response to the panelists, any questions specific to education, to shelter, to homelessness in general. Anybody? And of course the film, reflection on the film.
Don't be so shy. Just shout it out.
Yes.
Yeah, just to you kind of just said it, but the whole thing about just because you give someone a sandwich doesn't solve. And I think we often take that approach to our help. And what we really need is tax dollars. What we really need is infrastructure that's going to support people who are going through alcoholism, depression, whatever mental illness they have. And we don't have that. Instead, we'll just go get a can out of our cupboard and give it to the shelter and hope for the best.
Right, especially around Christmas.
So if those of us who really want to help, we need a change of heart about how that help's going to look.
Any other thoughts?
The film certainly wasn't what I expected. I expected to see, folks living in boxes and, out on the street and all that. So first perception was, it wasn't as bad as it all looked. But what I like about the film, I think, is it seems to reinforce, especially, the shelter that almost closed down, how, no matter how you contribute, if you can contribute a little bit financially to an organization like that, what that means and how precious that funding is, and how you're just a couple of dollars away from maybe closing a shelter like that. So when you walk down the street and see it on the street, it's hard to wrap your head around where do you start to help. How do you help somebody that's living in a box? But when you see the people that are helping others, I think it helps reinforce that some contributions can make a big difference.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's a great point. Any other thoughts? Yes,
I think our legislative body really needs to get educated on the whole situation, because as an individual, as all of you have said, that you don't realize how to help a person. So now we're all working on our own, but if you have a legislative body will fund, which we used to have in the state, a very excellent mental health care system. And everybody seems to want to cut the budget. And that a lot is a problem with the legislative body. They need to be educated on what's actually happening out there, and that this funding of these programs will actually save the taxpayer dollars in the long run.
I think that's a wonderful point, and I'm not going to get political, but
I didn't want to either. But that's where it's at.
Well, I think it comes down to short-term savings for long-term cost. And I think in our society there's been a history of that, that we're not prepared to invest in people for the long term. When I think about people who are struggling with addiction, they're struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, and they're struggling with mental illness and they're not getting treatment, they're not paying taxes either because they can't work. And so it's an economic argument, I think, that we need to make as well, that we need a citizenry that is healthy, that is housed, and is able to contribute as taxpayers to our economy. And those things are the stuff of life, work, loving, and contributing to a society. And you give people an opportunity, like you saw here, then they're very capable of coming through with that. And that was a very powerful message to me. Any thoughts from the panel?
Yeah, I just kind of have a comment on listening to what you're saying and what you're saying as well. Something I have always said and was able to do in my work in Rochester is develop the relationships outside of the school and welcome them to come and work with us in the school. And I come up with this saying, it is all about relationships, and it really is, because the school can't do it alone, the mental health services can't do it alone, any of the services that are provided cannot do it alone. And why should we? We're all working with the same families and kids back and forth, so we should work together on it. I do not know how to bring that together here in Concord. I don't live here. I feel like I should live in Rochester, but I don't. I'm retired now.
I'll be glad to give you a hand. I work in the community here, and I network with pretty much everybody, from education to social services, mental health. I've worked with Peter on a number of occasions. I work with the criminal justice involved population, and I gotta tell you, watching this movie kind of invigorated me, because I would love to have these three on my caseload. They would be a dream to work with compared to what I work with now.
We have more than 3, I'm sure we can.
Oh, I know. Without a doubt. But these people were career driven, they had goals. Yes, they had roadblocks in their way, both man-made as well as natural, but they didn't let that bother them. They didn't get overwhelmed with it. They were like, okay, gotta try again. Let's try
And
again.
again, you're gonna hear the educator talking, but to me, when we finally find our kids in school, and I know Jocelyne can attest to the challenges of that, as well, that they're safe in school 6 hours a day, and longer if they come early for breakfast and stay later for after-school programs. We can give them 2 meals a day, we can give them guidance and support, we can connect them to as many agencies as we can that will help us, but, you just have to see them through to get that education and continue on. And I used to say also, as a K-12 liaison, they made it to graduation, my job is done. Well, you know what? So many of them went on to college and they came back to see me because there was no one there for them to link to help them. So through Linda, who is not here, we now have initiated, through our teen task force as well, the higher education connection, and we meet with single points of contacts, also referred to as SPOCs, to help us bridge the gap between our K-12 schools and the higher ed campuses.
So you have that warm hand?
Almost everyone in the state of New Hampshire, we're getting there, because we're doing that all on our volunteer time, going to meet with them and talking about how to find who the liaison is and how to bridge that gap. So that's where my greatest interest is, but some of the other members on the teen task force are not educators, they come from different venues. And there have been a couple of legislators that have come to our meetings, Liz Blanchard here in Concord, and a couple of other folks. So Jim McKay, I think, was one of the fellows that came. So we've had some people turn out and continue, so they are getting that information back. So I'm sorry, I'm being a honk.
That's all right.
I think one of the other things to recognize too in our state is, when we're watching a film like this, and we're talking about a place like Chicago, there's a lot of gaps in our system in New Hampshire that are not necessarily the same gaps that a place like Chicago deals with, where in the state of New Hampshire, there is no such thing as an emergency youth shelter. And so young people that are struggling to have a place to lay their head every night or are living on the street, there is no emergency shelter that is geared towards youth. And so youth who are over 18, our young adults that we work with, are the only choice for them is to access the adult homeless services system. And for our youth who are under 18, there's a couple of pockets in the state where we provide emergency shelter options through agreements with local residential facilities, but other than that, there isn't a possibility. So those young people who are under 18 are really struggling to find a couch to sleep on, a floor to sleep on, and oftentimes are finding someplace under a bridge or a tree or someplace out in the community to sleep because there aren't a lot of options in New Hampshire.
I'm just reminded of a piece in the film. If you remember, outside of the shelter, when there were only 20 beds, do you remember that little piece where the 2 young women were speaking to each other?
Where are you going?
Where are you going?
Yeah.
And that, it was so well observed, that, because to me it said, in desperate situations you develop maladaptive coping mechanisms, and maladaptive coping mechanisms get you into trouble, but there's no other option. So I think that, we didn't get that fleshed out in the movie, but I think that was the message, right? Yeah. Yes.
I actually have a 2-part question. The first one has to do with the importance of housing for people. You could clearly see in this movie how important it was for them to have a place to stay. I'm wondering where Concord is on the concept of housing first, which I've seen some things in the newspaper about it. I've worked before at the overnight homeless shelter as a volunteer, soup kitchen, things like that. So I'm wondering where we are with that as far as providing a place for people that's safe first without requiring them to meet some kind of criteria first, like, getting out of addictive situations or whatever. The other thing is, for those people that aren't able to volunteer, that don't have that time, what can they do to contribute towards ending this problem? How can they help financially to help with the homelessness problem?
That is such a wonderful question, and we have someone in the audience who spoke earlier who I think is probably better equipped to answer that question. I will say that I've worked with Housing First programs in the past, and they work. It's one of those things that it's a practice that has fidelity. If you hold to fidelity and place people and then support them, they are incredibly likely to have good outcomes. And there's one program and it's called the 10th Decile, I think it's called, and it's a program I think out of Kings County in Seattle, where they are able to calculate the amount of savings for the entire community in terms of emergency room visits, in terms of use of other police and all of those. And there's an 87% savings per person who is chronically homeless, who then becomes housed with services placed in them. It works. It costs money up front, but long term, it's an unbelievably successful intervention. And I don't know, Ellen, if you want to talk to that a little bit
Sure,
more.
I'd be happy to. With the Concord Coalition to End Homelessness and the steering committee, which was appointed by the City Council last April, that's our #1 goal, is to bring that Housing First model to the Concord area. And it's not any one agency that will be able to do it. The idea of Housing First is that you don't have to meet a criteria of being sober or having handled your addictions, if you have any addictions, or that you're in substance abuse treatment. You are not required to do any of that. You are required to follow a standard lease provision. Just don't disturb your neighbors and don't trash your apartment. Just be a regular good tenant. So the idea, if you can provide someone with a rental subsidy and provide them with a caseworker who can help, smooth out the rough edges, maybe be a liaison with the landlord and troubleshoot any problems that come up. If you've been homeless for a long time, it might be a tough transition into a permanent home. But as Peter was pointing out, it's been proven all over the country and in other countries to save money and to allow someone the stability to deal with whatever underlying issues they have going on. So in Concord, it's going to mean getting agencies to kind of divert some resources, pivot their priorities a little bit, and so we're in the process of bringing that together, of trying to bring together the agencies that could make that happen. And it will take an investment up front, and that's where we're at. Knowing that there's always going to be a need for shelters, for some shelters, for people who have just entered homelessness tonight. You're not going to get into a permanent house tonight, but trying to move people out of shelters and into permanent housing is absolutely our goal. And I forgot to mention that Peter is on that steering committee as well. Peter Evers is serving on that.
One of many, I'm sure.
You said
Yes.
where you could get involved or how you could get involved. I'd say, our agency could absolutely use funding and volunteer support, and there's many other agencies in Concord, and a lot of them are listed on our website. So I would encourage people to get involved with agencies that are already up and going and doing the work, whether financially or with your volunteer help, rather than reinventing the wheel. Pick your favorite one and get involved that way.
Thank you. I think, question?
Yeah, I'm on a bit of a fact-finding mission. I come from an entirely different community, in fact, a different state. And I'm curious to know for the folks that are working in the education system, I'm assuming you're working with the population that's in school, but do you also have a way that you know how many potentially homeless, soon-to-be homeless youth have dropped out, and a way to reach out?
That's Erin's work. That's why we work together. She does the street outreach. Erin, address that a little bit.
Can you talk a little bit about how that's organized and how that happens?
Sure. So one of the things that I will say is because runaway and homeless youth really do work hard to be an invisible population and don't go around sort of bragging about the fact that they're homeless, counting accurate numbers of homeless young people is a very daunting and difficult task. But the one thing that I can say about that is that part of the work that Child and Family Services does is called street outreach, where we have teams of people on the street every day. We cover 14 towns on the seacoast and then an area of Manchester. So again, only funding for pockets of the state, not necessarily covering all of the areas that are in need. But in that work, we make contact with a number of young people, and we keep track of things like demographics and who we're contacting out on the street and what kind of services that they're accessing. And like you saw in the movie, we do a lot of things like handing out sandwiches and granola bars and bottles of water and hygiene packs and survival aid items and things like that out on the street. And so we do keep track of those kinds of things, and we are working all the time to try to figure out, you know, young people that haven't finished school, what school district they should be connected to, what school district is considered their home school, and then trying to connect them to the local homeless liaison to get them re-enrolled in school. Because like Marty said earlier on in this conversation, without an education, these young people really have so many barriers ahead of them already that if they can just really finish their education, it decreases such a huge barrier for them and provides so many more opportunities. So it is the work that we're doing all the time to try to reconnect them to school. But again, tons of work left to be done, and tons of kids who are, you know, still out there in the community, maybe living in abandoned buildings or places that we're not outreaching to because of the level of safety and things like that. So, you know, we're doing the best work that we can do with the funding that we have, but the need and the gaps in the system are so great.
I have something I can ask.
Another quick follow-up
Yes.
question, because what I see in our community is youth with children. Do you have a model for offering some kind of supports for young students who may also have children? Because, you know, the best thing that obviously you're trying to, you don't want to perpetuate the cycle.
Before I hand back to Erin to answer that, I would just want to say the reciprocal of CFS working with our schools. I got a call from a manager at Hannaford telling me, because I had a relationship with him through my partnerships, and he said, you know, Marty, there's a kid that I find on my bench every morning behind the store sleeping, and it's getting cold, and I don't know what to do other than to let you know about him. So he was a dropped out kid, was not enrolled in our schools, but I was able then to refer him back to Child and Family Services agency in our area. So it works both ways. Finding their outreach certainly finds more of the kids that are on the street, but we work back and forth. So something with kids.
So again, trying to meet the need the best way that we can. We do have a transitional living parenting and maternity program. So we do have two facilities in the state. One of those is in Manchester, and one of them is actually up north in Littleton. And they provide transitional housing for up to 18 months for young people who are experiencing homelessness between the ages of 18 and 21 who are pregnant or parenting. And it doesn't matter if they are male or female as long as they have at least 50% custody of their child. And we do try as well to hook, you know, as young people are accessing services like food stamps or TANF, they also have the opportunity to be able to access some child care support through those things. So young people that are in school, we really are trying to help them connect their youth to their own children to childcare in order to be able to continue their education. But again, gaps in services and, you know, the need, because most of the childcare programs that accept that sort of assistance have long waiting lists. And so these young moms are out of school for a good period of time, or really just, you know, every morning trying to piece together daycare and babysitting and, you know, whatever they can do to drop their kids off to be able to go to school. So there are definitely challenges. I think one of the other things that I can say about that, though, is that in New Hampshire, we are really lucky to have a lot of alternative education options for young people. So filling that gap with things like our virtual learning academy and other online opportunities where students can kind of do that in their own space on their own time to be able to keep up with their education even when they're struggling to have daycare and parenting issues.
I do have something to add too. I'm sorry, keep going back and forth. I know in Rochester when I worked there, and I think the program still may be in existence, is our technical school had a child care training program for kids who were enrolled in that. And there was also a child care portion of that, so that those who had kids could have their kids be part of that program while they went on with their other schooling. I don't know if it's still in existence, because I've been retired almost 3 years now, but that kind of thing might be something you could think about if you have a vocational tech school that offers that kind of training. There may be a way to coordinate that with youth who have kids.
Thank you. Thank you. Ellen?
And I heard you mention in the beginning, Marty, you have to be 18 or older. What if you're 16 and have a child? What if you're 15?
I turn that back to you all, and I don't certainly want to minimize the importance of housing first, but that doesn't apply to if you're under 18, I'm sure. And so I still turn that back to you as a community. What do you do for kids, for services, if they're under 18? And that includes childcare and other services. You know, I just put that back to you.
Can you explain why that's a problem? What the 18 cutoff?
You're an adult in this state when you turn 18.
And
That's,
if you're under 18,
you're a minor.
services unless.
And you can call DCYF and they'll say, thank you.
But I think
And that's not a slam, but that's just the
well,
way it is.
But I do think that's an important point about what the role of the Child Welfare Agency is in the state. And having actually sort of worked in other states and in fact other countries in child welfare, you know, it's different. It is different, and I think there are less resources allocated to more preventative services. So you end up with the agency getting involved too late in many of those cases. And having worked in the East End of London actually 20 years ago, in a situation where there was no legislation that covered child abuse, there was just the ability to go and request voluntary services. And that's a loud message that we should be giving to our legislature here.
I think the other thing to note too is that Child and Family Services does have some programs that work with homeless and runaway youth who are under the age of 18. The law, though, states that we do have to track down whoever their parent or legal guardian is and be able to make contact with them, and we can't really do or provide any sort of services to that young person without the permission of their parent. And so there's a lot of, really savvy work that has to happen in talking to those parents and trying to engage them in those services, even if that's just a phone call. And trying to really get them to understand that we are trying to assist their child as well as assist them, and kind of really building those trusting relationships in order to get them to engage in services. And I do think that, it definitely is a challenge. And then I think the other thing to look at in our state is the fact that our neglect statute is very broad and it's very difficult to prove neglect in our state. And so that's one of the issues with DCYF stepping in, is because DCYF is held responsible for being able to provide a level of proof that a child should be taken into their system, and that proof has to be able to go up in front of a court of law, and our neglect statute is very, very difficult to prove. And so when a young person is 13, 14, 15, 16, an older teenager, and they're out on their own trying to make it, and in very risky situations, kind of bouncing around, trying to prove that all of those things are a result of a parent's neglect rather than a child's misbehavior and choice to leave home is very difficult.
Okay. I saw another hand back there. No? Yeah.
My first question was about the barriers that you face for kids that are under 18, and you addressed that. The other question I had is, I'd like to hear a little bit more from the panel about the role that emergency shelters play, and what tools they, how they can help out. I mean, obviously it's a place to stay and be warm and safe, but what other roles that they play, is played at an emergency shelter?
For youth 18 and above?
Well, youth and interested in families too.
Well, in Manchester, I can just speak to Manchester, we have one emergency shelter for adults 18 and above. And honestly, when I work with kids who are 18, 19, 20, 21, they don't want to go there. They don't feel safe, As far as families, we have the Manchester Emergency Shelter, but again, you know, there's like, their beds are limited, and it's run by Families in Transition and the Welfare Office, but it's always full. It's really difficult to get families in there.
Something I just read recently too was really interesting is that homeless numbers, they mentioned in the movie that in Chicago, homeless numbers are going up. Well, that's also true in New Hampshire. And we hear homeless numbers overall were down 3% from last year. Now, I don't have the pit counts and that sort of thing, but for students, I can tell you, numbers were down about 4% from last year, but they're still 133% higher than before the recession. So, you know, we can pat ourselves on the back for 4% down, but it's not down. It's more than double. And the reason I actually asked for the microphone was that in my research just last week, I learned that the number of homeless shelters, the beds, has stayed exactly the same over the last 8 years. And so there's just nowhere to go.
Can I, so Family Promise, where's that lady? Ask that question over there, yeah. So Family Promise is for just families. Family being defined as has to include a child. And there's an affiliate on the seacoast, in Nashua, and in Rochester County. And there's one that we're trying to start. We're very close to starting, probably in June, in Concord. And it takes houses of faith, and they house families for a week at a time. And the families rotate, and there's a day center that the parents go to during the day to get the skills to get back and to have a sustainable life. It's actually a national program. It's across the country, 189 affiliates across 41 states in the United States. It started with a woman in New Jersey who met a homeless family and decided she wanted to do something about that, and said, well, my church has nothing going on at night. And she started housing families in her congregation, and then got other congregations to do that as well. So it's not the whole solving all the problems, but it works on that problem of overflow.
Right.
Too many, not enough places to go.
And they
It's
move
another
from
place.
from parish to parish. Is that the
Correct.
Interfaith Council group?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Active right now?
It's active in those other places. It will be active and I think there's talking about starting one in Loudon as well. Not Loudon.
Yeah, I was just going to briefly explain our program. You have to be the parent of or be a legal guardian to a child. It doesn't matter the family dynamics as far as, single parent, we have mom-dad families. It doesn't matter as long as you have a child. We are a case plan model, which means that when they come in, we assess their emergency needs. We rely on donations to provide emergency food, personal hygiene, things that they may not have the resources when they first come in to have. We give them directions and where to go for the food pantries until we can assess their situation financially. Some have applied for Social Security disability. So in that instance, we help them with that process. Some are looking for jobs. We actually require people who are eligible to work and want to work to do job searching. We have curfew, we have daily chores, we have bedtimes for the children. We want to keep things as normal and consistent for their stay there, especially for the children, and to keep parents and families in the habit of having those skills that they can take with them. We also, like I mentioned earlier, with their case manager, every week they meet, they have to go over their budget. They're responsible for sticking to their budget. And during that process, they also get help with filling out applications for housing. It's just, if they need services and mental health, we actually are in contact with Riverbend a lot, and any other agencies in the community that they may need services from. We advocate with the schools, as far as transportation, things like that, so children who are planning, or families who are planning to go back to their sending district can still remain in that district while they're in Concord. So it's just a whole, it's individualized for each family, and it's just a whole life
so much. I'm mindful of the time, and so maybe just a couple more questions. Yes.
Yeah.
Sir.
You shocked me when you said that the young adults would rather live on the street. Have you been able to assess why?
Trust issues.
Well, the fear, for one thing, and they're not comfortable in that particular shelter, because it's not a dry shelter, it's a wet shelter.
That's a big thing.
When people come in, if they've been drinking or drugging, they can still stay, and a lot of youth don't feel safe. So-
I'm a grown-up, I wouldn't feel safe either.
No, and I volunteer there, and, you know, it's a great place, please, you know, don't get me wrong, but it's not for youth, it really isn't.
And I think that when we're talking about young people, we have to remember, you know, we've all been 18 at one point, or you have an adolescent child in your house right now, and you think about the opportunities that you need that are age appropriate and developmentally appropriate to make mistakes and to mess up, and to have somebody there that's gonna pick you back up when you make a mistake, or help you to find the appropriate limits and boundaries. And shelters that are geared towards the adult homeless population are not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for adolescents who are working through a really tumultuous transitional stage in their life. I mean, for the best adolescent who has, you know, the most supportive family, that's a difficult stage in their life.
That's a wonderful point. That really is, and that's why we need to have that specialist knowledge of how to manage young adults. Ellen.
Well, speaking of tumultuous times, I noticed in the film that one of the people who self-identified as lesbian, and it appeared to me that a number of the kids staying in the shelters were transgendered or homosexual. Do you see that? And do these kids, I mean, they're undergoing more tumult in their lives. Are they being thrown out by their families? Is there that?
Yes, the national statistic is that a young person who identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer is 4 times more likely than their same age peer to be homeless or runaway. And for both reasons, either because they do not necessarily feel comfortable being themselves at home and so they choose to leave, or because they have come out and identified in their home environment and have been forced to leave because of that.
And I would just add that that population is also up to 10 times more likely to have an episode of suicidal ideation and gesture. And so, you know, this is an incredibly vulnerable population who has experienced often terrible rejection.
And I think that that goes back to the question about the emergency shelter as well. You know, young people who are experiencing homelessness really need a place that they can feel safe and accepted and not judged, and understand that it's a place where they can try on whatever their identity is for the day, or what they're experimenting with, or what they feel like they're struggling with and trying to work through, and know that no matter who they are or how they walk in the door that day, they're going to be cared about and loved, and nobody's going to be allowed to bully them or you know, really provide an unsafe environment for them. And, you know, that really takes a lot of staffing and programming to ensure all of those things for young people.
Well said.
Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, takeaways for this evening are, first of all, it's wonderful that so many people come out and care about this issue. And I always like to think, well, what are the next steps in terms of activism? You know, you can feel bad and complain about things. It doesn't change anything. It's action that actually changes something. And my takeaway is that we're all sort of co-combatants in the fight against homelessness, and we may come from very different places, but if your eye's on the prize of addressing the issue of inequity and inequality around the issues of homelessness, it's a great starting point. And I would say that I would tell people to see this movie, because it really will give people a wonderful exposure to the resilience and the hope that young people have, even in the darkest and most difficult situations. And that would be my takeaway. Anybody else want to have a few last words?
What was the date of that film again?
April 12th.
April 12th?
Mm-hmm. Right.
They're in the midst of having public hearings about the budget, by the way.
That's right.
Which is a moral document of our state.
Yeah.
And shows our commitment to what we're going show up to those and speak up.
I'm also gonna use this as a shameless opportunity to plug a fundraiser that we're doing. On March 20th, Child and Family Services is doing something called a sleep out, where a group of leaders and community members from across the community will be sleeping outside in Stanton Park, right in front of the Radisson Hotel on Elm Street. And we are doing that to raise funds and awareness about the issue of homeless youth in the state of New Hampshire. So if you would like to support us, you can go to www.crowdrise/sleepout.
And those folks who are involved in Superfest, maybe we could take some soup down to them on that. Yes.
Since we're doing shameless plugs right now.
Go for it.
You were actually asking how to help too. I don't know if you're aware, but right across the street, directly across the street, is a Families in Transition thrift store. I actually just yesterday afternoon, there were 11 of us, and we moved all the racks around, swept them off the floors, gave the place a big cleaning and that sort of stuff. But great place. It was my first time in there. But they can use all the support, financial donations, clothing donations, that sort of thing. And they're right across the street from this theater.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
It is like the Macy's of this.
4,000 square feet.
It is good.
The building is beautiful. And the other thing I'd like to point out real quick is that I was the only guy out of 11 volunteers yesterday, and I don't know what the reason for that is, and I find at a lot of these things right up here, I'm the token male. So just call to the gentleman in the audience to please get more involved, because I just don't see men doing this work. Obviously there are, but
Shout out, brothers.
it's shocking. So please get involved.
Preach. Ron.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that I get to testify at the public hearings for the finance den. I went to Derry and testified last night, and I sit on the State Suicide Prevention Council. I'm a nominee board member. I'm a member of the Coalition to End Homelessness here in Concord. I'm a member of the Justice Involved Veterans Task Force for the state. And so I go in, and I'm the Superintendent of Corrections for Merrimack County. And why would the Superintendent of Corrections be engaged in so many different boards and everything else? Mainly because jails have been islands unto themselves forever. And we have to be a part of the community. And so that has been my goal ever since I took over the facility in 2005. So I go in and testify last night. I go in and identify and represent each of these organizations when I testify in support of funding, appropriate levels of funding for all the service organizations that are assisting the needs of people and stuff. But I ended my testimony before the committee last night with reminding them who we're dealing with. And we're dealing with our family members, our friends, and our neighbors. And that's whether they're incarcerated, whether they're homeless, whether they have mental illness, whether they have a developmental disability, or whatever. That's what we have to stay focused on. Who are these? They're not anonymous people out here. You know, the youth that are out there, the adult homeless, they are people. They belong to someone, right? Yeah. Someone might have disowned them, but someone has to pick them up and be the strength for them. And that's what this movie represents. It's the strength of assisting and taking the time. Not just walking by that person, you know. And we cannot, as we cannot continue to incarcerate people for their illnesses, we've got to look at other means. When we talk about wars, the funding and stuff, a lot of it's displaced funding. You know, because if we quit incarcerating so many people in this country, we could do a lot of other service programs and stuff that would work to keep people out of these situations and stuff. So that's my time on this.
What a wonderful way to finish, actually, Ron. What do you do in your spare time, by the way?
Make sure that my wife and I make sure we keep our daughter headed in the right direction.
All right.
Thank you.
Education and stuff.
Good.
I have one more takeaway. I have a takeaway that costs you nothing. Whatever you learned tonight, whatever was new to you, tell someone else, share it. And if you come up with some kind of solutions, do it.
Thanks, Martin. One more.
One last quick question for whoever put this on tonight. Do you know if they'll be doing an email list, so that way those of us that want to connect and have questions for one another, we can bounce ideas off each other?
That's an Ellen question.
Jemmy Broussard is with the Red River Theaters, and she brought this together. She would have that. I don't know whether she can do that or not. I can ask her though, certainly. I don't know if that's
But if not, you could go through the coalition build that chain
Yeah.
Right.
so that we can help assist with answering questions and stuff.
Great, thank you. Thank you everybody for coming out. What a great conversation. Thanks